America keeps sending the weapons. America keeps writing the checks. America keeps vetoing the UN resolutions. But ask yourself one question. Whose war is this really? Because here is what nobody is saying out loud. Israel does not just want this war to continue. Israel needs it to continue. And the reasons go so deep, so tangled into Israeli politics, Israeli survival calculations, and the personal ambitions of one man, that when you see the full picture, everything shifts. We are going to go there today. The history, the strategy, the politics, the money, the power, and the question quietly terrifying every foreign ministry on the planet. What happens when America finally decides it has had enough? Stay with me, because this gets dark. And by the end, you will never see this war the same way again. Israel is a country of roughly 9 million people sitting on a piece of land the size of New Jersey, surrounded on multiple sides by states and armed groups that have, at various points, publicly committed to its destruction. It has fought major wars in 1948, 1956, 1967, 1973. It has fought brutal conflicts in Lebanon and Gaza. It operates in a permanent state of what its own security establishment calls existential threat. That word, existential, is the most important word in Israeli strategic thinking. For Israel, existential does not mean uncomfortable. It means, if we get this wrong, the country ends. That is the frame inside which every single Israeli decision gets made. Now, October 7th, 2023, Hamas launched the largest attack on Israeli soil since 1948. Over 1,200 Israelis killed in a single day. More than 200 taken hostage into Gaza. It was a catastrophic intelligence failure, a catastrophic military failure, a catastrophic political failure. And it happened on the watch of one man, Benjamin Netanyahu, the longest-serving prime minister in Israeli history, a man who spent his entire career arguing that he alone could keep Israel safe. In a single morning, that identity collapsed. And here is where we have to be honest about something uncomfortable. The story of why Israel needs this war is not just a story about national security. It is also, in a significant way, a story about one man's political survival. And those two things have become so intertwined that separating them is now almost impossible. Netanyahu has been under criminal indictment since 2019. Bribery, fraud, breach of trust. 3 separate cases. His trial has been ongoing for years. And every Israeli political analyst understands this. A sitting prime minister in wartime has enormous tools to delay a legal process. A former prime minister sitting in a courtroom has none. Netanyahu's political survival and the continuation of this war are not separate issues. They are the same issue. Former Israeli security officials have said this publicly. Members of Netanyahu's own war cabinet have raised it. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is Israeli political reality. Now, what does Israel actually want from this war? Because the stated goals and the real goals are not always identical. The stated goal when the ground offensive began was to destroy Hamas's military capacity and bring the hostages home. Simple enough as an objective. But as the months passed, as the death toll climbed, the war kept expanding instead of narrowing. Israel struck Hezbollah in Lebanon, struck Iranian-backed militias in Syria, launched a direct strike on Iran itself, assassinated Hamas's political chief Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran on Iranian soil. And every time a ceasefire deal came close, every time mediators in Qatar or Egypt thought they had a framework, something happened to collapse it. And more often than not, that something was an Israeli action. Why? What is the real strategic logic here? Here is the argument Israeli hawks make, and it is not unintelligent. Israel's long-term security problem is not just Hamas. Hamas is a symptom. The disease is the Iranian-led network of armed groups, Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, militias in Iraq and Syria, Hamas in Gaza, that Iran spent 30 years building and funding. This network exists for one purpose: to create military pressure around Israel from every direction simultaneously, so that if war comes, Israel cannot fight on one front without being attacked from 5 others. October 7th in this framework was not just a Hamas attack. It was the axis of resistance moving. And so, in the Israeli strategic worldview, this war is not really about Gaza. It is about breaking the entire ring, permanently. And this moment, with American backing, is the opportunity to do damage that would otherwise take decades of covert action. That is why Israel is not looking for an off-ramp. Israel is looking for a road that goes further. Now, the American side. Because this relationship is one of the most complex and most financially loaded in the world. The United States gives Israel roughly $3.8 billion in military aid every year, written into law, flowing regardless of which party controls Washington. Since October 7th, Congress approved additional emergency packages worth billions more. American bombs, American artillery, American intelligence, American vetoes at the UN Security Council, blocking ceasefire resolutions that the entire rest of the world supported. So it looks like America's war. America is paying for it. America is arming it. America is defending it diplomatically. But here is the critical distinction. America has interests in this war. Israel has survival calculations, and those are fundamentally different things. American interests: stability in the Middle East, containing Iran, maintaining Arab partnerships, preventing a wider regional war. Real interests, but interests of strategy and preference, not interests of existence. And when a war starts costing more than it delivers, a great power can change course. It is painful, but it is survivable. Israel does not have that same option. Israel cannot simply decide the math is not working and walk away from its own neighborhood. This is why, even inside the Biden administration, one of the most publicly pro-Israel administrations in recent American history, you started hearing private frustration become public frustration. Biden's national security team sent letter after letter to Israeli military leadership raising concerns about civilian casualties. The State Department produced an internal report questioning whether Israel was meeting conditions required under American law for receiving weapons. And then, one weapons shipment. A delivery of heavy bombs, briefly paused by the White House. Just one, just briefly. And Netanyahu went on television and accused America, his most important ally, of withholding weapons. He invoked the Holocaust. He said Israel would fight with its fingernails if necessary. That reaction tells you everything. When even a temporary interruption triggers that level of panic, it reveals how essential the dependency is. And at some level, Israeli leadership knows that American patience is not infinite. And that knowledge shapes every calculation. Now, the Trump factor. Because the current moment is genuinely complicated. Trump returned to the White House in January 2025, promising to end wars and make deals. And initially, his administration did push for and achieve a ceasefire and hostage deal in Gaza. Some hostages came home. There was real hope the nightmare was winding down. Then it fell apart. Israel resumed military operations. The Trump administration found itself in the same uncomfortable position as its predecessor, publicly calling for restraint while privately unable to enforce it. Trump posted on Truth Social and said he wanted the situation resolved and the war ended. But wanting something and having tools to achieve it are different things. What Trump brought that was genuinely new was a willingness to apply direct pressure on Iran. American military strikes on Houthi positions in Yemen. Serious discussions about supporting Israeli strikes on Iranian nuclear infrastructure. And Iran, watching all of this, made a historic calculation. The Iranian foreign minister publicly confirmed that Iran and the United States entered indirect nuclear negotiations, meetings in Oman, something the Islamic Republic had resisted for decades. This created a fascinating and dangerous paradox. The Trump administration was simultaneously supporting Israeli military operations while negotiating with Israel's most dangerous enemy. Two policies pointing in completely opposite directions, coexisting, creating confusion, opportunity, and serious danger. Israel watched the Iran talks with deep suspicion. Because here is Israel's nightmare. America and Iran reach a deal. Iran caps its nuclear program in exchange for sanctions relief. America declares victory, moves on, and Israel is left with an Iran that is economically recovering, still backing Hezbollah, still calling for Israel's elimination, but now protected from American military pressure by a diplomatic agreement. That nightmare, the fear of that outcome, is one more powerful reason why Israel has an interest in keeping this conflict at an intensity level that makes a clean US-Iran diplomatic settlement politically impossible. Israeli and American interests, while broadly aligned, have real points of divergence, and those divergences are getting harder to manage. Let us look at the regional picture, because what is happening around Israel is not static. Jordan, one of only 2 Arab states with a peace treaty with Israel, has been increasingly alarmed by Israeli government rhetoric about the West Bank. Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich and National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir have openly discussed annexing parts of the West Bank. Jordan's King Abdullah publicly warned that if Israel moved toward formal annexation, the Jordanian-Israeli peace treaty would come under enormous strain. That is not a small statement. Jordan and Israel share a long border. They share intelligence. They quietly coordinate on security. If that relationship fractures, the consequences are severe. Saudi Arabia is the other enormous variable. Before October 7th, the Biden administration had been working toward a historic Saudi-Israeli normalization deal. Saudi Arabia recognizing Israel, formal relations established. In exchange, Israeli commitments on Palestinian statehood, American security guarantees for Riyadh. This deal was close. Some people in the room said it was weeks from announcement. Then October 7th happened, and the deal died. The Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman publicly stated that normalization with Israel requires a credible path to Palestinian statehood. The scale of Palestinian civilian casualties, the images that circled the globe, made it politically impossible for any Arab government to move toward Israel without paying catastrophic domestic cost. MBS is ruthless and pragmatic, but he cannot normalize with Israel while Gaza burns. This matters enormously. Normalization with Saudi Arabia would have represented a genuine strategic transformation, the Arab world's most powerful state accepting Israel's permanent existence. That was worth more strategically than almost any military operation. And the war has, at least for now, taken it off the table. So let us do the accounting. What has this war actually cost Israel? And what has it gained? On the cost side, Gaza has been devastated to a degree that shocked even experienced observers of conflict. The Palestinian death toll climbed into the tens of thousands. The majority of buildings across large parts of Gaza destroyed. Hospitals damaged or dismantled. Aid organizations describe conditions approaching famine at multiple points. Israel's international reputation, even in countries broadly sympathetic, took severe damage. The International Court of Justice opened a genocide case brought by South Africa. The International Criminal Court issued arrest warrants for Netanyahu himself and former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. Netanyahu cannot now travel to most countries without risk of arrest. These are historic shifts, not minor diplomatic friction. On the gain side, Hamas's military capacity was severely degraded. Key commanders killed. Tunnel networks destroyed. Hezbollah took enormous damage. Its leadership was decapitated, including longtime leader Hassan Nasrallah, a seismic event. Syria saw the Assad regime collapse, weakening Iran's land corridor to Hezbollah. Iran was struck on its own soil for the first time, revealing significant gaps in Iranian air defenses. These are real military achievements, the kind Israeli security planners wanted for years. But here is the question nobody in the Israeli establishment has a good answer to. What comes next? What fills the vacuum? History has a brutally consistent answer. When you destroy a governing entity without a plan for what replaces it, when you create a power vacuum in a territory of 2 million people, you do not get peace. You get chaos. And chaos creates the next generation of militants. The same cycle that created Hamas after Oslo failed. The same cycle that created ISIS after the American invasion of Iraq. Devastation plus humiliation plus no political horizon equals radicalization. Every time, without exception. Israeli military planners know this. Some say it privately. But the political coalition Netanyahu depends on to stay in power, the far-right parties of Ben Gvir and Smotrich, does not want a political solution. They want territory. They want settlements. They want annexation. And Netanyahu needs their votes to survive. So the strategic logic that says you need a political endgame gets subordinated to the political logic that says you need to keep the coalition alive. That is the trap. And it is costing lives every single day. Now, the hostages, because this human dimension gets buried under geopolitics and it should not be. The hostage families in Israel have become one of the most powerful political forces in the country. They march, they meet foreign leaders, they go on international media, and their message has been consistent and heartbreaking. Stop the war long enough to get our people out. There is a documented and undeniable tension between the military campaign and the hostage release. Military operations in Gaza have endangered hostages on multiple occasions. There have been tragic incidents where hostages were killed by Israeli fire, soldiers who did not know they were shooting at their own people. The conditions for a negotiated hostage release, some form of ceasefire, prisoner exchange, are directly in tension with the conditions Israel says it needs for military objectives. Some hostage families have said publicly and painfully, the government is not prioritizing our people. This accusation is not coming from Israel's enemies. It is coming from Israeli mothers and fathers and children of people still underground in Gaza. That is a wound inside Israeli society that no military success can heal. Now, the biggest question of all, what happens if America gradually steps back? There are serious people in Washington, people who have served in Republican and Democratic administrations, asking this question quietly. What is the American interest in unconditional support for an Israeli government that is rejecting American advice, embarrassing American diplomacy, and generating anti-American sentiment across the global South? These are not anti-Israel questions. They are cold, realist, strategic questions. And the fact that they are being asked at all represents a shift from where Washington was 5 years ago. The scenario that worries Israeli strategists most is not a dramatic American abandonment. It is a slow drift. Conditions attached to weapons, delays in approvals, abstentions at the UN instead of vetoes, slightly more critical public statements, each individual step looking minor, but the cumulative effect being that Israel loses the unconditional American shield that has protected it in the international system for decades. Europe is already drifting. Spain, Ireland, Norway recognize Palestinian statehood. Even traditionally more cautious governments in Germany and France have shifted their public language. The EU has resisted suspending its trade relationship with Israel, but that resistance is getting harder to maintain politically. The global South has moved much further. At the UN General Assembly, votes on Gaza have shown nearly universal condemnation of Israeli military conduct. China and Russia have exploited this dynamic skillfully, positioning themselves as champions of Palestinian rights, amplifying the image of America writing blank checks for a war that is killing civilians. That image is doing lasting damage to American soft power in a world where the United States is already being challenged by Chinese influence. This is the real strategic cost of the war to American interests. Not just the money and the weapons, the cost to American credibility, the cost to American leadership in a world already moving toward a multipolar order where Washington no longer sets the rules alone. Where does this go? There are 4 realistic scenarios: a negotiated comprehensive deal, ceasefire, hostage release, interim governance for Gaza, the beginning of a longer political process. Enormously difficult. Netanyahu's coalition cannot survive a deal that looks like surrender. But Qatar and Egypt have been creative. The Trump administration has shown willingness to pressure both sides at moments. Hard, but not impossible. A prolonged, frozen conflict. The hot fighting gradually reduces. Gaza remains under Israeli military control or chaotic hybrid arrangement. Hamas retains political influence. The Palestinian population lives in destroyed infrastructure with no horizon. This is not peace. This is managed disaster. And managed disaster explodes eventually. Escalation, Iran, feeling cornered by military pressure and nuclear negotiations, accelerates toward weaponization. Israel and the United States face the choice they have been delaying: strike the Iranian nuclear program and trigger a regional war, or accept a nuclear threshold Iran. If the current talks in Oman collapse, this timeline compresses rapidly. The consequences: Iran, American forces, Israel, Hezbollah, Houthi strikes on shipping, Gulf states drawn in, would be catastrophic for everyone. Internal Israeli political change. Netanyahu's coalition collapses, a new government comes to power, and pragmatic leadership decides a deal serves Israeli interests better than endless war. This has happened before. After the trauma of 1973, the political consequences eventually produced the Camp David Accords with Egypt. Trauma can lead to transformation. Whether that leadership exists in Israel right now, that is the open question. Here is what I believe, and I want to be direct. Israel's security threats are real. The trauma of October 7th is real. No serious person should dismiss the danger that groups like Hezbollah and Hamas and the Iranian Revolutionary Guard pose to Israeli civilians. Those threats exist, but real threats do not automatically justify every response. And the evidence, the scale of civilian casualties, the destruction of civilian infrastructure, the humanitarian crisis, the killing of aid workers, the absence of any coherent plan for Gaza's political future, suggests that what Israel is doing is not purely security calibration. It is also domestic politics. It is one leader's legal jeopardy. It is the ideological agenda of far-right coalition partners who openly want to annex Palestinian land. And it is a vision of regional transformation that goes far beyond anything the United States agreed to support. America has slowly, reluctantly, inconsistently started noticing this gap. The gap between what it is being asked to enable and what its own interests require. But noticing the gap and closing the gap are different things. And as long as the political cost of pressuring Israel in Washington is higher than the strategic cost of not pressuring it, the gap stays open. And people keep dying. The question is not whether Israel has the right to defend itself. It does. The question is whether the way it is choosing to defend itself and the way America is choosing to enable that is actually making anyone safer, or whether it is winning battles and losing the future. History does not grade on intentions, it grades on outcomes. And right now, the trajectory of outcomes is not moving toward the stability that allows a 9 million person country surrounded by enemies to finally exhale. The bombs can degrade military capacity, but they cannot defeat an idea. And the idea of Palestinian national self-determination is not going away. No matter how many tunnels get destroyed, no matter how many years this continues, that is the choice nobody with the power to make it is currently making. And that, right there, is the real crisis. If this gave you a perspective you did not have before, subscribe right now. This channel exists for the analysis you will not find in a headline. Every single week, deep dives, uncomfortable truths, real context. And answer this in the comments. Do you believe a two-state solution is still realistically possible? Or is that idea now permanently dead? Tell me what you think, because your perspective matters here. Like this video. Share it with someone who needs the full picture. And I will see you in the next one.